Chair, I can confirm you're live on YouTube.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the Biodiversity Task Group. I will go straight into the agenda without delay. Apologies are the first item on the agenda. We have apologies from Councillor Bullen and Councillor Parish is standing in for him. And also apologies from Councillor Bartram and Councillor Hennigan, my apologies, is standing in for her. Do we have any other apologies?
Not that I've been notified.
Thank you. Right, agenda item 2, minutes. Has everybody read the minutes and are we agreed on the minutes? Those who were there, I think it's me, isn't it? So, yeah, the minutes are fine by me. Carry on. Is there anything coming out of the minutes that somebody wants, people want to say? I would point out that the pollinator, sorry, the biodiversity competition is covered under agenda item 6. So shall we move on? We have under agenda item 3, SO 34, standing order 34. That would be Councillor Devula-Pally on online.
Yeah.
No other SO 34s. Thank you.
Sorry, apologies, Chair. I was also asked to sub for Councillor Bullen. Is that okay?
Well,
Can't do it.
you can't. It's not easily done online. You have to be in person. So Councillor Parish is standing in for Councillor Bullen, but we're very grateful for your attendance today because we need you for agenda item 6, which I'm looking forward to. Thank you. Declarations of interest, agenda item 4. Do we have any declarations of interest? No. Okay, moving on swiftly. I have no items of urgent business. So that moves us on to agenda item 6, which is the biodiversity competition, and Councillor Devula-Pally is presenting. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Chair. I've got a little presentation. Am I allowed to share my screen and put that up?
Yes, please.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to try and work this out. I'm not very good at this sort of stuff. Right, how do I share my screen?
There should be
share. It says share content.
Bottom that should say share screen. Along the bottom.
I've got to share content. Is that the same thing? Screen. Oh, yes. Perfect. Okay, so. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yeah, we can see your screen. Oh, yeah.
Can you?
Yeah, we've got it.
Perfect. So basically, I asked a volunteer group called the Nature Volunteer Network to just go through this project and kind of come up with some criteria and stuff. So this is their work. So huge thanks to them. I explained the brief to them, and basically what they came up with was that we would have a biodiversity project in West Norfolk encompassing every household in Norfolk. Within that, we thought there might be 4 householder categories. One for the best container garden. So this would be for people who've got, paved front or back gardens or, just hardly any space at all. One category would be best child under 14 garden, a best small garden, and a best large garden. Now, I would appreciate some guidance on how to define a small garden and a large garden. And maybe that's something that our ecologists could help with, or someone who's got a bit of knowledge. Otherwise, I will come up with, something from the internet. And within each of these categories, the criteria are similar but not identical. So if I quickly run through them, the best container garden category would have a wildlife-friendly water feature, recycled container, native wildflowers and grasses, an insect hotel, climbing plant, and wildlife-friendly plants for every season. So all of these are very doable with a few containers as illustrated there, and so on. So I don't know if you want me to go through every one of these categories, or I will obviously circulate this, if there's interest. But they've all been very carefully thought through, and there's a specific reason for each of the criteria that are in there, and they're all very doable. In terms of the other categories, we have best nature-friendly workspace. Could be any workspace in West Norfolk. Best nature-friendly school, and I thought we could tie it in with the schools project that we've already got underway. The best nature-friendly parish. So this could be for the parish that has the most entries into this competition. Yeah, go on. Sorry, feel free to interrupt, it's fine.
Carry on, Pallavi.
Okay, and then one for the longest beeline in the borough. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, a beeline is basically a continuous wild space containing bee-friendly flowers. It's a bit like a bee highway, so the bee doesn't have any gaps from one clump of bee-producing flowers to the next one. It would be a continuous line. It could be something as simple as a stretch of lawn that's been left unmowed continuously through various gardens, because unmown lawn invariably contains wildflowers, which are very bee-friendly. And for workspaces and schools, they would be required to have each of these. So this is essentially the criteria that we've developed. I think I can stop sharing now.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So, yeah, any questions, you're very welcome. And obviously, we will need to write up the project properly with an introduction and explanation and so on. But this was really cutting to the meat of the criteria and the categories that we would have.
Right. Okay. First up, Jeff. Oh, sorry, Councillor Parish.
It seems a very good project, Pallavi. It's a contest.
Thank you, Chair.
It's a contest which is possible to do. It's not one of these ones which is difficult to set up or with difficult criteria. About the size of gardens, small and large, I think RSPB do the same sort of criteria for the annual birdwatch. So you could follow the guidelines that they produce, really.
That's a great idea. Thank you.
Schools can be involved. That's good. And I like the parish idea that parishes can encourage people to take part in order to get a parish award.
Yeah.
And that's always amuses me because of my name, obviously. So.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.
Officer Horn.
Sound like a policeman, don't I?
Do you want you prefer Jeff? Yeah.
Jeff is fine. I think the issue here is effectively how we make this proposal happen, because the council operates a number of competitions, events. We've got the Mayor's Design Award, we've got the Business Award. They, on the face of it, they sound really quite simple and straightforward, but they do involve an awful lot of work when the council themselves operate these sorts of proposals. I think one of the benefits of the proposal that Pallavi has put forward is that this is very much a community-led initiative with the council providing support. And I think the support that they're looking for is a general endorsement of the scheme and publicity that would go with that, and the support in terms of a project plan as to how it can all be brought together. So I think it's a genuine partnership proposal between the council and community groups, which makes it more deliverable, in my opinion, than if it was a completely council-run proposal itself. If this panel is happy to support the initiative that's been put forward, then we'll have to put forward a detailed proposal to Cabinet, because there will be a Cabinet decision in terms of taking this forward, with all of the details of just how this can be brought together and worked up. We have had initial discussions with Pallavi in terms of some of this stuff, and I think we're fairly confident that we can bring something together and put a recommendation to Cabinet to make it work. And I think our recommendation as officers would be that this group support this proposal.
Thank you. Yes.
I just had one technical question, really. I believe on one of your slides, you got ponds. And I was just checking that ponds were not going to be a prerequisite for anybody with a garden, especially with those with small children that might be reluctant to put that type of water feature into their garden.
No, absolutely not. It's a very good question. So these criteria are essentially that, and anyone can enter, even if they take a couple of criteria on there. There's nothing to stop people entering the competition. Obviously, the more criteria they tick off, the more likely they are to be chosen for best garden feature. But no, absolutely not. And the pond obviously can be made safe. The other thing I omitted to mention was, as Jeff alluded to, this is very much a community helped projects. So we've got a real collaboration there. And any advice that people would want about how to go about improving their garden for wildlife, they can go to the Nature Volunteers Network for help. They are developing a website which is going to cater to this quite nicely, and they'll also be able to help via a dedicated email as well.
Just sort of taking up on Jeff's point there, I presume we're seeing this as the officers are going to do the sort of background work and printing the papers and getting the information out, but judging of it will be done by what members of this panel and any other volunteers from the council who want to go and judge it, because that's going to, you could get 100 people apply to this, so it's going to take a fair bit of effort to judge it, isn't it? But that doesn't want to be council officers, does it?
No, it doesn't need to be council officers at all. I'm thinking that, I think the entries will need to come into a portal sort of under the council, as it were. But I'm quite happy to think of who would be able to do that. It's not a problem at all. We can sort that out. I'm guessing that most of the sifting will happen remotely, or via the online and paper applications that come through. And then a few will be selected perhaps to, go and visit in person, at the time of the final award, deciding who to give the awards to, just to make sure that, all the features that they say they have are there, sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Otherwise, thank you, Councillor Hennigan.
No background to this, and only hearing it for the first time, so this might be a very daft question. So being a councillor who's in a town and unparished, is there anything that we can do to encourage towns to get involved in this? I know individual we can have gardens in towns, but it's just that you have a specific category for parishes, but nothing for the town centres. And I'm thinking about Hunstanton, Kings Lynn. Is there like a general award to maybe get a bit of competition between the towns or something? Although that's maybe not very healthy, I don't know, but.
No, it's a great suggestion. I'm open to ideas. What does the rest of the panel think? We could have a town category.
Yeah,
we've got Hunstanton, Kings Lynn, and Downham Market, haven't we? Any other towns?
I don't think so. I think that's the 3 towns. Yeah. So it was just a thought.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Councillor Parish.
Well, for Kings Lynn, it's opportunity for plaques. And Hunstanton and Downham Market are actually parish councils, the towns, but they are parish. As far as the organisations are concerned, I understand Jeff's concern about officer workload, but parish councils are mentioned as part of the categories, and parish councils could actually, if they're keen, actually run this within their parish and take on a lot of the
local work rather than people having to travel out to it. You could, I don't know, it depends on how many are interested, doesn't it? And you could ask parishes to do the judging within their own parish, and then this committee or whoever would look at the lead people in those across the parishes. Just a suggestion, really.
Thank you. Yes, it makes sense to go through a process that shortlists and then work from a shortlist. I think that's how a lot of the judging categories work. Martin.
Always cautious about how one describes themselves in these online meetings, but I do think we're going into a territory where some level of expertise on the subject matter is going to be necessary to make sure there's kind of fair and consistent judging. This isn't like maybe a painting competition or a piece of artwork where, you know, everybody would have a view. We do need to make sure that if we're not going to have a single judging panel, even if they are broken up into judging groups, that they are operating off the same kind of criteria, especially if we did want to pitch towns and villages maybe against each other. And one other alternative might be for the towns and villages is to maybe we do know how many properties we have in each of those parishes and towns. If we were looking at the one that was maybe doing the more entries, it would be a higher percentage of how many properties there were in that area. And that way there wouldn't be any parish or town that would be disadvantaged in terms of taking part in a single competition rather than multiple competitions.
Yeah, no, that's a great suggestion. Thank you. Yeah. And yeah, I agree with regard to quality. I mean, the criteria are fairly foolproof. So the judging would be based on the criteria that we've developed. But obviously there could be a situation where several houses meet all the criteria, and then you end up having to pick one. So yeah, we might enter into slightly more complicated territory. So we may then decide to either do a lucky draw or develop extended criteria. I wonder if our ecologists might have a view on that.
Yep. So I think I completely agree that it will have to be pared down online first to get the smaller pool of entrants, but there's no reason that once we have that smaller pool of entrants that I can't, well, I don't know who else would be on the judging panel, but yeah, an ecologist, possibly someone from public open spaces, obviously a councillor, probably if we've got involvement from the Wildlife Trust or someone, a representative from there. And as we say, it's supposed to be quite easy criteria for people to implement in their gardens so that they feel motivated to do it. So I don't know what sort of extended criteria we would have, because it should be simple measures. It could then go down to perhaps how many species we've got, or how appropriate they are for the landscape, etc. We could start looking at that sort of level. But you know, I think that's a good suggestion. Once we've got to the smaller pool, we can start developing that high level criteria that could, yeah, I think it would be better than a lucky draw to have a proper criteria to look at. So I think that's a good idea. It's quite easily implemented.
Right. Thank you. Any other speakers? It's still very, as far as I can see, it's still very high level at this moment. There's a lot to be determined, and that comes out of the proposal. I shall read out the proposal and the options. I think the suggestion is moving towards a number of categories, potentially an online application process, which is then shortlisted. Is that correct?
Sorry, it needs to be a mixed one to make it equitable to people who don't do online. So we must have the option of people being able to post in their applications.
So it needs
and libraries will need to be involved so that people can have forms at libraries that they can manually fill in and either submit at the council office or in a library collection box.
Okay. So you're suggesting 3 potential routes: online, post, and through libraries with application forms and boxes.
Yeah.
Right. I shall read out the proposal. The proposal is Councillor Devulapalli intends that this competition will be community-led, relying on community volunteers. She's asking that the council support the introduction of an annual biodiversity competition by 1, publicly supporting and endorsing the proposal, 2, providing support and guidance to the group on how to run the competition through preparation of a project plan. 3, provision of comms support to highlight the importance of biodiversity and the competition. The options are as follows. Officers are currently exploring different options to help support and encourage biodiversity prior to putting forward a recommendation to Cabinet. Options include 1, the council hosting and running a competition to promote biodiversity along the same lines as the Mayor's Design or Business Awards. This is not likely to be feasible within existing resources without reprioritising. This would also have the appearance of a council rather than a community initiative. 2, the council providing support to a community initiative along the line set out above. This is the preferred option. So I ask of the task group, are you happy to support option 2? It is, agreed. One last thing, Councillor De Vullapelli, would you very kindly send Democratic Services a copy of your slides so they can be included in the minutes?
Yes, of course.
Thank you very much indeed.
Bearing in mind they're very much a draft, so they're not for wider circulation at this stage. Yeah.
Okay. They will be. Right, bear with me one moment.
Oh, that's fine. I didn't mean that they need to be secret. I just meant that they're not a final thing. So, you know, anyone can look at them as long as they understand that they might be revised. That's all.
Okay, so these are, it will be made clear that these are draft proposals. Yes. Thank you very much. Right, moving on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 7, pollinator action plans. Helen Bazowska, are you still online?
I'm here. Hello, Michael.
Excellent, thank you. Right, shall we try and get, there's your presentation. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, can everyone else see okay? All works for you all? Good. I thought I'd give you a little bit of a, if I may, a quick introduction to where we are at Norfolk Wildlife Trust. Over the last 2 years, we've been through a sort of quite a substantial amount of change. And we have a sort of new business strategy, which you should be able to see there. And you can see that it's at the top of the sort of circles. It says improve, expand, connect. Many of you will be familiar with the Lawton report, Sir John Lawton's report into the state of nature in Norfolk, first published in 2010. Which looked at, you know, recent declines in nature and what was needed to address those. So what was really needed to turn this around, so we stop being such a nature depleted country and start putting it back. And the things that John Lawton came up was that we needed more space for nature, we needed bigger spaces for nature, we needed the existing spaces for nature to be in good condition, and we needed to connect spaces. So this forms the sort of basis of our own business strategy, improve, expand, connect. And many of you will be aware of the work that we do caring for our own nature reserves. So, you know, those of you in West Norfolk will probably know Roydon Common, you'll know Grimston Heath, you'll know Holme Dunes. You know, those are the lands that we own and manage ourselves. We also do a huge amount of work outside of our nature reserve. So that's advice to land managers, that could be farms, it could be communities. It includes the owners of county wildlife sites. So some of the woodlands that you're involved with within Kings Lynn, Springwood, Refley Springwood, they fall in as county wildlife sites. So we provide advice to land managers all across that spectrum. We also do a lot of work on planning and advocacy, as you all know, sort of responding to planning applications and advocating that wildlife is really put at the heart of decision making for the future. So this isn't just about objecting to planning applications, but it's looking at things like mineral plans, housing plans, district plans, neighbourhood plans, saying, you know, how can we actually make sure that nature is put into the foundations of those, so that in the future we're not always objecting, but actually these things are falling into place in the right way. And finally, a sort of big area that we're hoping to move into, but it's new territory for us, is a lot more research and science and innovation. Some of that could be around making management for nature conservation more financially viable, and looking at end products. A lot of stuff currently gets wasted through management for nature conservation. So looking at actually, is there an end product for that? So that could be things like, if we're cutting grass on an annual hay regime, we end up with a lot of cut material, and at the moment it just gets wasted. Are there actually local solutions to compost that or use it in biomass? So we're looking at those kind of things, as well as actual ecology research. We can come back to questions. So next slide, please, Laura. So pollinator plans very much sit within our work to, as I've said, improve, expand and connect, to improve existing spaces, to create more spaces for wildlife, and to crucially connect up the spaces that we have. Probably worth, I thought, just outlining what we mean when we talk about a pollinator. People tend to think it mainly refers to bees, but it also is butterflies, moths, hummingbirds we don't have in the UK, but on a global scale, hummingbirds are important. Beetles, even some things like wasps and ants that are kind of less popular in the public imagination than butterflies and bees, are actually important. And it's worth saying that I think the figures vary globally, but something like 80 to 90% of all pollination is actually carried out by wild species, not by honeybees, which are a domesticated species. Next slide, please. Oh, here we go. Oh, here we go. So yeah, so why should we be concerned? And I think the main thing is that, like an awful lot of other species, UK pollinator species are in decline. There are some that are already extinct. There are others that are now becoming less abundant or very, very restricted in their range. And this is why the connection of spaces is quite important, because often these species are specialists. They live in a specialist environment. And as those environments become more and more isolated by arable farming and development and concrete, things that are not very permeable for wildlife, that fragmentation means those populations become genetically less diverse, they become smaller, and they become more vulnerable to disease and impacts like climate change. So that's where the connectivity becomes really important. And yeah, it says here 85 to 95% of our insect pollinator crops rely on wild pollinators. So I have to kind of remind myself that I love wildlife, and I'm quite happy to go out there and do measures for wildlife just for the sake of it. But we have to bring ourselves back also to the human benefits, and globally the financial impacts of caring for our pollinators are absolutely huge. And obviously in an agricultural county like Norfolk, this is a very, very important thing. It is worth asking ourselves always, why are these species under threat? I think the latter half of the 20th century, we saw a catastrophic decline in habitats, in semi-natural habitats, because of urbanisation and changes in agriculture. And a lot of sort of semi-natural habitats like heaths, woods, meadows, sort of no longer had an economic function. They were just not really needed anymore in modern systems. And they've taken with them a lot of our pollinator species. So we've lost habitats. Our habitats have become more fragmented. A lot of wildlife habitats, or what would have been wildlife habitats like heaths and woods, are no longer really managed, because that's not economic. So we begin to lose these species. And also, we have changes in agriculture such as pesticides and herbicides, and we've got future problems like climate change and disease. All of those have an impact, and the sort of cumulative impact of those effects it can be quite large. So that's why we should be concerned. There's a lot of things to worry about. Next slide, please, Lauren. So what do we need to do for pollinator recovery? And as I said, this is where we at the Norfolk Wildlife Trust are really positioning ourselves at the moment, is looking at nature's recovery. And it is around this sort of, as I've said before, our little mantra there of improve, expand and connect. So definitely improving existing spaces. So it's knowing the spaces that we have that could be of value for pollinators, and sort of assessing what sort of condition they're in, and what can we do to improve that. So that could be things like changing mowing regimes in public spaces to allow wildflowers, what we might think of as weeds, to flower. It could be planting ornamental spaces with species that provide not just nectar, but provide a wide range of nectar throughout the year. So you need early nectar sort of kicking in over the last month, right through to nectar at the end of the season to help species hibernate. We need to reduce our pesticide use as much as possible and look at alternatives. And I don't know, some of you might know the, I think it's down in Frome. They have a sort of community weeding session now to get over the use of glyphosate to weed local streets down in Frome, which I think is a really funny idea. They call it the hoe down because they all get out with hoes and they hoe around the public spaces to reduce the weed on the streets, which I think is really fun. Definitely mowing regimes, and that's something we can talk about in a bit more depth if we need to, because it's not sort of straightforward, don't mow. It's having a range of regimes that encourages a wide variety of species. So things like daisies and buttercups, which will happily grow in parks and recreation grounds, actually like to be mown fairly frequently. So moving from once a fortnight to once a month, but actually keeping mowing them once a month will encourage those species. So you could sort of maybe mow half every other week and let those species flower and then mow them, because they actually won't compete with tall grass. So they need that short grass. So it isn't a very simple way forward. It's about creating a mosaic of different regimes. So that's improving the existing spaces, creating new spaces for pollinators wherever we can. That's very, very important. We must have more space for species, and connecting spaces. So this could be as simple as hedgerows and wildflower strips on farms, down to looking at things like green infrastructure planning within urban areas and saying, how do we make sure as we go forward that those green spaces that we've got are actually connected up? And there's some really interesting community initiatives out there that it's worth looking at. I've looked at one in Wanstead in northeast London, where there are little fragments of what were once bits of Epping Forest, and the local community are encouraging people to wildlife garden really intensively on certain streets to sort of create pollinator highways on those streets between the existing bits of common land that were once bits of Epping Forest. So really interesting. And finally, raising awareness. And what you were talking about, I was really interested listening to what you were talking about with your biodiversity awards, because that's a really great way of raising awareness. And it's raising awareness of those simple actions. I think sometimes people think this is a bit of a mystery, you know, that it's all very hard, but actually the sort of drip, drip, drip of here's a simple thing you can do, and here's the results that it has, is a really useful thing to do. Next slide, please, Lauren. So, excuse me, I'm just going to have a quick drink. So what is being done already? There is a national pollinator strategy produced by the government in 2014, and I've put the 5 main areas there on the right of the screen that we basically covers what I've already said. And that's a really good way. If you're looking at something like a pollinator strategy, I'd really recommend reading the national one first. There's a number of local authorities that have picked that up and run with it to create their own already. I'll come back to that in a minute. I think somebody mentioned earlier about beelines. So the National Beelines Project was started by an organisation called BugLife. And it isn't just bees, as in, it isn't just the letter B for bee, it covers all bees, butterflies and bugs. And it was actually like a national plan with a map of the whole country saying these are where we need to put in connectivity. But the really interesting thing is that loads of people have picked up the idea and sort of started creating their own beelines. So that might be like right across a district. And the sort of best one at the minute in Norfolk, and I can put you in touch with them if you need to, is the Chet beeline. So this runs from the source to the end of the River Chet, which is sort of between South Norfolk and the Broads. So it goes from, those of you who know the eastern bit of Norfolk, it goes through Porringland and down through Treadgrave and Loddon and out there. So it's not a very mighty river, but the idea was to make contact with all the landowners along that river and gardeners, allotment holders, and try and see if they could connect up the spaces and improve what was there along the river. So the kind of very different scales there of projects that are going on. And I think those sort of 5 areas are really good to frame a pollinator strategy. Okay, next slide. Yeah, those are the sort of 4 priority areas. I just put that in as a kind of, this is from the National Pollinator Strategy, and it just sort of underlines what I've said before. Okay, Lauren, thank you. Oh, have we gone back? Okay, hooray, here we go. Thank you. So existing local authority actions. There's a lot of information on this on the Friends of the Earth website. They've got a whole section dedicated to pollinator strategies, and it's really worth a look. And one of the interesting things I think is that the pollinator plans have led to savings. So you can see the figures there that Dorset and Burnley councils have saved by reducing their cutting. And they're also planting perennials in parks, bee-friendly flowers instead of sort of annual bedding plants in their ornamental plantings. Actually has quite a bit of a saving. And I think the exemplar that's held up is Cornwall County Council. And there's a list there of the sort of things they've done as they've gone through setting out their pollinator action plan. So beginning by looking at their own assets and operations, ensuring that's embedded across the sort of whole operation of the council, increasing awareness, supporting monitoring and data collection. And I think that's something we often forget to do when we're doing these plans, but I think it's quite important to make those links with local recorders, local wildlife recorders, and see if, you know, benefits can actually be measured over time. Identifying local opportunities, which, you know, I think with things like your biodiversity awards, that's, you know, a really good opportunity there. And then looking at, you know, where existing habitats can be buffered and cared for and what they actually bring to the local area again. So it isn't just about those habitats, but it's, you know, what do they give to tourists? What do they provide as a sort of nature-based solution? Okay, next slide, please. Right, I'll finish up on this one. So you've got the Cornish pollinator plan there, the Friends of the Earth one. I'll leave these with you so you can use them. Please feel free to do so. Link to the National Pollinator Strategy. The little picture is the workshops for a wilder community. So these are the workshops that we run from Norfolk Wildlife Trust. They are open to all communities to join and come along. I think there's a sort of nominal charge. They're not expensive, and they cover a whole range of things, you know, from practical tool use to understanding individual species to pond management. They cover a sort of wide range of issues. One of the things we're looking at is the new parish biodiversity duty. And I wasn't sure how much you knew about this and if that was something you considered. And I thought maybe if I sort of finished there, that's something we could talk about, because I'd like to know if you've gone down that route and if what your experiences are really. You can turn the slides off, I think, Lauren, and we can chat now.
Thank you very much, Helen. I will just go to our ecologist over the biodiversity duty. This was a discussion we had at our earlier meeting. If you would be kind enough just to respond. Do you want a couple of minutes?
I can
I
respond.
think that's a different duties, Chair, if you don't.
It is.
Yeah.
So there are separate duties. There's a duty for the council, the borough council. There are duties for parish councils. Were you specifically speaking us promoting the biodiversity duty for parish councils or our own borough council biodiversity duty?
I'd be interested in either, actually. Thank you.
So how we actually tackle our biodiversity duty as a council is still being worked out. There's not a lot of guidance out there, and I don't think we're the only ones that are struggling to figure out what is actually required. Obviously, our first step is biodiversity net gain. We're trying to encourage habitat banks of local landowners, particularly habitat banks that are in strategically significant locations. So, you know, people that are going to provide wetland where we want wetland, people who are providing hedgerows where we want hedgerows, etc. So that's kind of where we're starting at the moment. Obviously, there's no reporting on the duty until next year, when we might actually have a little bit of biodiversity net gain that we can report on. But as I'm sure you're aware, Helen, net gain has only just come in, so when we haven't had a local policy yet, so we haven't had any developers really that are volunteering that. So we don't, essentially we don't have anything to report yet until the mandatory legislation comes in and we can start enforcing it legally. Yeah, but at the moment we're sort of playing it by ear, trying to figure out what other local authorities are doing and seeing how we can best report on that. We're working in partnership on the local nature recovery strategies as well, but the county have only just recruited their manager for that, so that's only just getting kicked off, as I'm sure you're aware. But so in short, we're not too far into it yet. The parish duty isn't really even on our radar yet because we're still trying to figure out what we're doing.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because that's the, sorry, Haverly, I'm aware that you've got your hand up, but yeah, I'm aware that that's the feedback we're getting from every local authority, from, you know, borough councils to parish and town councils, that, you know, they feel slightly adrift with the whole thing. So we are skilling ourselves up to be able to give support. And that was why I wanted to know where you are really, because if there's anybody out there who knows more than we do, we'd love to learn. But I think what we're thinking at the moment is we obviously can't come to every local authority and provide one-to-one advice, but we're thinking of doing some either online or in-person sort of surgery sessions, if you like, workshops for people to come along with a sort of some basic information and then some questions and answers. So if that's something you're interested in, I'll definitely make sure you're included in any sort of future mailings.
Yeah, I think so, Helen. We've been getting that sort of stuff from the Planning Advisory Service on net gain, and from Nature England on nutrient neutrality, and it's the sort of pop-up surgery sessions that are the most helpful, where all the authorities can feed in and we can work on a problem together. So definitely that's really good to hear that you're doing that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Claire and Helen. I might come back to you on the situation as I understand it with parish councils, but I shall go to Councillor De Villa-Pelli, who has her hand up on the screen.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, my question was more about parish councils really, because I've had a couple of parish councils have asked me to help them with this. So it'd be amazing to have something that we could actually I'm quite happy to sit with them and go through stuff, but without even a starting point, it's quite hard.
Well, yes, I think you can sort of, we have a Wildline number on our website or a Wildline email address. If they email that, we can sort of add them to our mailing list and then let them know when we're doing something. Yeah.
Thank you. That's extremely helpful to know. Before I go to Councillor Coons, my understanding is that the Norfolk Association of Local Councils have put out a sort of pro forma policy for parish councils to adopt, but not all parish councils are members, which potentially leaves them out of the loop. Councillor Coons.
Thank you. Just going back to the idea of not cutting grass verges and grass strips so often. Well, I should just point out that every year I get dozens of emails, people complaining that the grass verges aren't being cut, grass strips, areas of grassland within small estates aren't being cut. I don't get any that ever come back and say, you really didn't ought to be cutting this because of looking after the bees. So it's something you maybe are going to have to take the public along with on that, but I think it would be very unpopular at the moment if you just stopped cutting grass verges or did them a lot less often.
I should go to Claire, the ecologist.
Yeah, so that's not anything new. So I'm sure, Helen, you hear it all the time. Anything that looks wild, looks untidy, and people don't like it. It is a case of changing public attitudes. If you go into Cambridge in the centre, where they have their manicured Parker's Peace, but they've now got huge amounts of wild areas on there that are just wild. They're just uncut, they're full of wildflowers, and they've got interpretation boards. So I think places like Cambridge and Huntingdonshire are a lot further ahead than us, but as you say, it's not to be underestimated, the power of the public and their disagreement. And we've spoken about it in public open spaces that you have to deal with it all the time. But I mean, this is one of the reasons that we need a pollinator action plan, that we need the biodiversity competition to raise awareness, because people, if they see something and they don't understand it, they immediately think it's bad. So raising awareness through these, small channels that will build to something big, is a good start to changing those public perceptions. But you're right, at the start, we're going to get a lot of backlash from it. But unfortunately, this is the way we need to move forward, is wilder. We can't keep throwing pesticides on everything, we can't keep mowing everything with an inch of its life. But it was very interesting, Helen, what you said actually about the different mowing regimes, because we often do focus on the hay cut for the wildflower meadows. But that would be something interesting for our pollinator plan to look at what we've got with public open spaces and where the areas that we can leave for, close cut mowing to encourage those early pollinators, like your daffodils and your daisies. And make separate, so separate regimes. That would be something that we should look at for our own pollinator plan.
And I think it's there's a lot of people who've gone down this route in the past with a lot of success. South Norfolk have actually done quite a lot in the last couple of years, and Helen Sibley, their sort of green infrastructure lead, has made some big gains there. And yes, it's been about putting up notices, but also, and I know I've been doing this work for 30 years now, it's things like where there are obvious paths or against a pavement, mowing the first metre so that it looks tidy, and then you leave the wilder stuff a bit further back. So that actually creating it so that it looks intentional makes a big difference. So it isn't just, wet grass hanging over the pavement or hanging over the roadway or whatever, but actually really thinking about what you're doing. It isn't just about neglect. And that, I think, is the biggest barrier I have here, is that, often people think it's just about neglect, but actually it's about really careful planning.
Martin.
Yeah, Helen, thank you. And Claire, you both made exactly the points that I was going to bring in from an operational side. In order for people to get buy-in to these schemes, it is really, really important that they appear to be managed wilding. And that is not just about doing exactly as you're suggesting, making sure that it looks managed and well kept up to the point that you've intentionally wilded it, but also including the interpretation information to allow people who wander by to notice that, along with, we have much better tools these days to map things so that if somebody does pop on their phone and look at an area and they want to report it as being unkept, they can actually see that it was intentionally so. It does put increased pressure on our public open space teams to clean those areas, because it is a lot harder to dive into unmanaged areas and pick up litter and detritus that we would normally pick up. And in some ways, they are litter attractors as well, because it does look as if, if you throw a bottle in a bush, people don't seem to care as much as if they were just to throw it on a piece of well-kept, managed lawn-like grassed areas. So it does make the work slightly harder for our teams in terms of clearing those up. But it is all about information. And if we can educate the public to why we're doing things, hopefully we'll get the buy-in from them as to how we should look after them in the future. Thank you both.
I will sort of add to that I think one of the mistakes that we have made a lot in the past is, like I said before, assuming that the not cutting means not cutting, but actually if I showed you a chart of the decline in bees against the decline in hay meadows in Britain, you would see that the two are roughly parallel. And hay meadows were actually cut and grazed very, very, very regularly. And the highest amount of wildflowers actually occurs where you have a 2 to 3 times a year cut and removal of cuttings. So actually, you want something that isn't tall and overgrown and tussocky on the whole to have the plants for pollinators. You actually need something that's cut fairly regularly. It's just less regularly than once a fortnight from April to October. So, you know, it should be fairly short, fairly fine and full of flowers, not a lot of tall overgrown grasses. And it's getting that bit right. We do have a Wildflower Meadows course coming up, which I think I'm teaching this year. If you can't make that, I'd be very happy to come and look at something in your area and talk that through with you, if that would help.
Thank you. Councillor Parish.
Thank you. It's interesting conversation. Your speaker is telling us what we should be doing. Officers are saying what they're limited and restricted about what they should be doing. Grass cutting came up, and I've been approached over the years 2 ways. One was, why isn't the grass cut? And another side of the coin is, why are we cutting the grass? Because they wanted pollinators, and they've read the books, they've seen the TV programmes. And it is something of an age difference to an extent, not always. But Heacham's full of old people. I'm one of them. I'm a young one in Heacham. And the older you are, the neater you seem to like things, and the younger you are, the less inclined you are to be neat. But the comment that was made about keeping edges next to pavements tidy is correct. And anything, if there's a wide verge, anything behind that can be allowed to grow longer. There has been some work on that in Hunstanton along the back of the cliffs with where there's the wide grass area. But there's patches still which are left long, but they're not very good long. They're just long grass really. They haven't been enriched with anything significant. And I was involved years ago in Wolverhampton and by connection Telford with mowing hay meadows. And then you place the cuttings from the hay meadows on land you want to enrich, and the seed from that you've taken off the hay meadow. Hopefully takes in the land where you've laid it, and you encourage wildflowers to flower there without actually buying seed or doing anything else. It's just laying the hay on the ground. Now, I don't know how many decent wild hay meadows there are around here where you could actually do that and collect and do it, but there were some in near Wolverhampton. It was done. And it was done in Telford onto old mineral debris from industrial waste, and it was laid on top of those, and they became flower hills rather, flower mounds. So I'd like to see more work like that done. I'd like to see grass areas enriched with wildflowers, not just allowed to grow long and lank. It is a matter of education to an extent, but you have to start somewhere, and you can't educate without example. So I think what council needs to do, this committee, this panel, council in the long term needs to do, is to quickly decide what it wants to do and then establish how best to go about that. Otherwise, you are going to have this argument about what we should be doing, what we can do, but you don't actually do what you want to do. You know, so you need to be more forthright, I think, in that sense.
Thank you, Councillor Parish. Anybody else on this? I would just like to make a note that I understand that we are trialling yellow rattle to reduce the height of the grass growth. I'm getting nodding from both directions. So my question to Helen is, how successful is yellow rattle, which I understand is semi-parasitic, so it draws nutrient from the grass. How successful is that, and other things we should be attempting to reduce the height of grass that we do let grow?
Yes, So yellow rattle, it's an annual, so you will need to cut and sort of shake the seeds out every year. Otherwise it will sort of disappear. You'll need to seed it into relatively bare ground. So normally what we suggest is that you sort of give it a really hard rake and get some bits of bare ground, seed it into that. And then when it gets going, it will be very, very successful for a few years till it sort of reaches a balance. But what it will do is it will keep your grass a lot shorter. If you have areas like the previous councillor was talking about, and I lived in Wolverhampton myself for quite a long time, and I know some of those projects. I worked on them, so that's really interesting. If you have areas that are just tall grass and they're sort of rough looking and there's not much else in there, I would suggest that actually what you need to do is cut them more frequently over a couple of years. So you know, it isn't just once a year, but it's 2-3 times a year. So probably late summer, autumn and spring. And then you'll want to start bringing your seed in to make them better. Because if the seed isn't there and it isn't coming up naturally, then as was rightly said, you'll need to introduce it and put the yellow rattle in with it to reduce that vigor of those tall grasses. And whilst tall grasses do have their value, they're not particularly the most saleable thing to the public, and they're not particularly the best thing for pollinators. So, you know, keeping them in check is no bad thing.
Thank you very much, Helen. Councillor Coombs.
Just a question for planning. I suspect the answer is going to be no, but one thing that always annoys me, I see it regularly, it's been happening over the years. People buy a house, the first thing they do is rip the entire front garden out, hedges, everything that grows. They lay a membrane over it, cover it with shingles, park the cars on it. That's bad enough, but a lot of them are even doing it with the back gardens now, doing the same thing and putting AstroTurf down because they're too lazy to cut the bloody lawns. I guess there's nothing we can do about it. No.
No, there's not. That's not development, and the hedgerow regulations cover. They don't cover gardens, explicitly exclude gardens, so we can't protect garden hedges. But you're right. So yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Hennigan.
Yeah, you've actually just raised my pet hate there, because where I moved from previously, everybody used to have a beautiful front garden, and gradually they just got paved over. I am aware, this is where a planning thing comes in. I know that the council there, it wasn't this council, did recommend that people landscape for drainage and to encourage wildlife and whatever, but they didn't enforce it. I'm assuming from what you just said there, does that mean that you can't enforce it? So if somebody decides to put in a front garden that they must have a portion of it still landscaping?
No, the only thing that if it's shingle, that's actually okay because it's from planning point of view because it drains. So if you want to put a solid hard standing down, then that will need consent unless it runs off to a border. So, but that's not to do with the biodiversity side of it. That's to do with water runoff and drainage. So effectively we have no control unless it's a protected tree preservation order. But generally they're not.
Yeah,
most people don't have those. So otherwise, they can pretty much take them out.
comes-
And you see estates being degraded really over time. It's happened, you can't think of estates that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware that you have to have it so the water penetrates or runs off, whatever, but it's just, it seems, I think you just opened a can of worms with me there, so maybe it's going off subject slightly, but it's, yeah, we're just losing so many. I just think of all those front gardens, how much natural habitats that we're losing, especially in towns and cities where this is more likely to happen, that you're not getting the landscaping and the the biodiversity that we're here to talk about today, that you're losing an awful lot of that. And it actually is not just the environmental impact, but the aesthetic impact as well, because it takes away from an area, because a nice flower bed is nicer than a concrete driveway really, but and it doesn't mean to say you can't have both. You can still have your driveway, but part of it has to still remain sort of whatever. I've got to stop now. Get off my soapbox.
Right, can I go to councillor Davula-Pelly?
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points. First of all, I don't know if this has been discussed before, but the council does a lot of planting around the borough, doesn't it? You know, our open spaces team. They have pretty flowers. I know certainly Downham, there are lots of very pretty flower boxes and things. And I wondered if we could have a policy that we would use pollinators for all of our planting that we do. The second thing is, this has been spoken by previous speakers, but I think if we put little informative, attractive signs on whichever verges, you know, we decide to mow less, to cut less. And I think it'd be wonderful to have Helen's advice on exactly when is best to do this mowing to keep the grass short and let the wildflowers grow. But if we could have little quirky signs, you know, which are educational and fun, with maybe a picture of a bee or something to say, you know, I don't know, I'm sure we come up with a few. I've seen a few, or, you know, over the years online. I think that would hopefully stop any criticism in its tracks, because instantly the person who looked at it, you know, I think it's hard for all of us to get used to a slightly untidy looking verge. You know, if you've grown up with pristine green uniform lawns and then suddenly you see lots of dandelions and, you know, other weedy things, it will look untidy, you know, and it's going to take time to understand that that's okay. But if you have a sign there, you know, a picture of a little ornament or something, a sign that says this for the bees or whatever, hopefully that will just stop things. So I think if we could do that from the start, so that people know it's deliberate, it's not the council being lazy or just saving money, it's mainly about saving nature.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Parish. Thank you.
New speaker, please.
Yes, please.
Oh, he's gone. Has she gone?
No, she's still there.
I'm still here.
You said you worked in Wolverhampton. Did you work with Professor Ian Truman?
No, I worked for the Wildlife Trust for Birmingham and the Black Country in the early 90s. Yeah, with Pete Shirley.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a question. The other question was to officers. Strimmers. Do council strimmers have a warning on them to avoid strimming hedgehogs? Because there are such signs that you can put on strimmers.
Yeah, it's a good idea, and you know, I would recommend a quick walk through an area that's going to be strimmed first, just to check, because what will often happen in the summer is that in areas of long grass, the hedgehogs will create a temporary nest that they'll only use for a few days of a big ball of grass in the middle of tall grassland areas. And so going in and just a quick walk through to check if there's nothing like that there is a really good idea.
Yeah, I think the warning signs that go on strimmers tell operatives to do.
Yeah, I think that's a good plan. I mean, I am, as you can imagine, really quite busy, but if you had sort of 3 or 4 areas that you wanted to look at, I've got a younger colleague who's sort of being trained up to take over a lot of my work, and we'd be very happy to come out for a day, you know, and look at some areas with you at some point. And you're ecologist. I'm sorry, was it Claire? I don't think we've met, but hello.
Yes, it is Claire Helen. Yep.
Yeah, hi. It'd be really nice to meet up with you, and you know, to perhaps look at some areas and talk over, you know, what could we do to make these areas work for both people and wildlife. And I'm very used to compromise, and I'm very used to coming up with plans that work for both people and wildlife. So, you know, as I said, I've been in this a long time. I think I've probably heard every argument in the book. You know, I'm quite used to sort of throwing ideas around and seeing what works for everybody, really.
Thank you very much, Helen. That's a fantastic offer. I will go to Martin and then Councillor Coons, if I may, please.
Yeah, several questions there. Firstly, in terms of hedgehogs, yes, the guys are already briefed to do the walkthrough checks. And just for reassurance more than anything else, it's one of the things I've not received a complaint about us inadvertently, you know, strimming hedgehogs, thankfully. So I'm reassured that the training is taken into effect. Hope that's not famous last words. In terms of the offer of help and support, I think it is really, really useful. A number of things have come out today. Just to throw a couple in here, in terms of grass cutting, we're clearly geared up for grass cutting. predominantly in open spaces and recreational ground, which is low level grass cutting. We're not so well tooled up to cut grass at high level. And we're really not tooled up at all to recover grass and for it to be taken off site and to be taken and disposed of elsewhere. So I do feel as if we're more moving towards the necessity for a plan of, you know, where we want to end up, what's necessary to get there, and what the timeline might be to achieve it, along with some recommendations to members in terms of what the financing of that might look like over a period of time. And in picking up the very last point in terms of the gratefully received offer of some help and support, there are some areas that we're currently looking at that we do have a few months of pausing and breathing space to think about how we might move those forward. So I think some help and support to make sure we're kind of doing it with the best advice available at the time would be really quite timely. How does that work for you, Chair?
It works extremely well for me. Thank you very much. It sounds as if the offer is duly to be taken. Thank you for making it, Helen. Oh yes, Councillor Coons.
Just going back to the strimming of hedgehogs, also be very careful when you're strimming, not to strim wasp nests. From personal experience, that's not a good idea. They can fly a lot quicker than I could run anyway.
Thank you. Time presses on. I will just make a quick note of some of the key points. The suggestion is that we improve, expand, and connect. We think in terms of potential patchworks, that we have to manage expectation by engaging and informing. We have to look at the balance between what we want and operational constraints. It sounds as if we're all very keen to go forward with this, and that an offer of help has been made by Helen of Norfolk Wildlife Trust, which we have gratefully accepted. I think all we do is note the report. Everyone is happy to note. I would ask Helen might wish to stay on, because the next agenda item is very closely related. Are we happy to move on?
Yeah, I'm happy to stay if I'm useful. It's up to you, really, Chair.
Right. Well, Claire Wiggs, our ecologist, is going to give us a note on pollinator action plans. So if you're free to go, Helen, we are extremely grateful for your expertise and your presentation. It's given us a lot to think about and has been very, very helpful to us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. That was really great. And, best of luck. And we are here if you have any questions.
Thank you.
I will go. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so we now move to agenda item 8, which is developing a local pollinator strategy. Over to you, Claire.
Thanks, Chair. So this is really just to build on what Helen said. I just pulled together a few things that we might want to consider for our own action plans. Helen did go through a lot of it there. One thing is that we can do is highlight the work that our open space team are already doing. So cutting the wild grass, you stay away from the pavements, etc. The stuff you're doing with pre-walks checks, etc. That's all stuff that the public should know about, that you're doing well already. That can be highlighted in our pollinator action plan. It can be a way to again highlight some spaces that are being kept more wild. So then anybody who looks at our pollinator action plan can see that straight away, that it's a big wild area. Okay, it's in our pollinator action plan. Not everyone's going to go to that action plan, but it's a good place to start to highlight the work that you are already doing in your everyday work. Helen noted about the Cornwall pollinator action plan, and I think it is a good template. The key thing with the pollinator action plan is making it accessible to the public, again, so they know what we're doing, so they know what they can do. Some of the action plans that are out there from other local authorities are quite unwieldy. They're quite wordy. It's not easy to look at. It's not easy to understand what you should be doing. The Cornwall one is quite different from that. It's got a lot of pictures. It's got a lot of, quite simple key messages, which I would suggest is something that we want to follow. If we want people to be engaged in it. I mean, I'm an ecologist and I didn't sit down and go through every single one of these action plans because there was so much, so it was so wordy. It's, you know, you're not going to sit and look at that. You want something that you can then understand quickly, that you can take on board. So Helen noted about threats to pollinators. That's something that we will want to highlight in our own pollinator plan. Again, perhaps we might want to look at threats that are particularly key to our area. Pesticides, and we've got a lot of arable and farming. Pesticides might be a big one for us. But the habitat fragmentation, the habitat loss, climate change, disease, etc., will be things that we'll want to think about, and that will help us inform what actions we might want to take, you know, to start preventing those threats. Something I did see across some of the other local authority action plans, but they split it into key themes. Some of the action plans split it into different sectors. So there was a section there for what different types of land use, so for farmers, for offices, for open spaces, etc. So that was a good way to split it down, to think about actions for those specific areas that can be generalized broadly. Another thing that we'd maybe want to include is what sort of thing pollinators need. So shelter for hibernation, that can be anything from bits of old masonry, tussocks of grassland, deadwood, piles of stones, etc. But obviously the key thing is the foraging, is the nectar and the pollen, which probably most people are already aware of, but it might be a shelter that people are less aware of. So raising awareness of the other resources that pollinators need that we could look at incorporating. The other thing I saw that was quite good, but it sounds like the public open space is theme already on top of this, but there was a section in some of them that was a leaflet for operators. So I don't know, perhaps for different types of land management, there could be a leaflet that is for those people to say this is how you should manage it, etc. And again, it's just like pictures and short words that is easy to understand, and easy for someone to pick up and do. And that could be also someone with their own garden. If they're thinking about mowing their grass, it might go to our pollinator action plan, and it would be there for how should you mow your grass, etc. So that's it really. It was just some points for discussion to talk about, you know, how might we actually, what might we particularly want to look at in our own plan, the aspects that we need to focus on. But Helen did do a very good job of covering that already. And that's it really. That's, yeah, just open to discussion. But I think it would be a really good idea to have the Cornwall one particularly has a pollinator positives good news section, and that's where we could focus on our public open spaces, have, you know, 4 examples of good news that we're doing well, encourage people, let them know that the council is on board, that they already know what they're doing, etc. So yeah, that's it really. Those are the points for discussion. It's all in that note. I just sort of, as I say, put it together so it could give a broad idea of what we should be looking at for these plans, what they should include. But yeah, the key 2 things are obviously the connection for pollinators and the community engagement and the communication of what's required.
Thank you very much, Claire. Open to the floor. Any, or have we discussed this pretty well?
Brief comments to the farm community. That is well unique scenarios in the UK, where the family route largely many states of America. Looking up on Wikipedia just now, you'll find many photographs of those well shouldn't be used, and they were contaminated in the sun. So maybe I think a reaction to that.
Well, there's the thing. It's sadly something central government do, but it is something we can pressure on. But we could also perhaps speak to some of our near neighbours at British Sugar and. Councillor Coons.
Yeah, if I'm just coming back on that one, I know talking to a lot of the local farmers, they are very concerned about losing neonicotinoids, especially on sugar beet seed. I've seen it myself. The field next to my house 2 or 3 years ago was drilled with untreated seed, and the whole field was completely yellow. It was just full of virus yellows, and reduce the crop to virtually nothing. I'm not sure whether there's anything now to replace it, but if they don't treat the seed with something, it virtually wipes the crop out of sugar beet anyway. It's I know the farmers are dead against losing it. But there we are.
Thank you for that. Sadly, it's beyond my pay grade, but I don't want to see all our if we lose our pollinators, the farmers lose out in other ways. So it's, I mean, we have to, it's a discussion to be had.
Many years, I hate to see it. I've seen the effect of when bees have been spraying on a grape tree. I would look to see it gone, but until there's an alternative, it's very good.
Anyone else wish to enter into the discussion?
Are you doing AOB at the end? Or?
I will do any other business. Yes, I will just briefly, I think it's a report to note, but it sounds to me as if this is something that we can ask officers to go away and work up a draft pollinator action plan. And it sounds as if the Cornwall the Cornwall offering or is something to start off with as a basis for something that is appropriate to West Norfolk.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we're working up to a final cabinet report, aren't we, with a number of recommendations. Obviously, one of them will be, as it says in the terms and conditions, to consider the feasibility of a pollinator action plan. So we will obviously need to do that, and we can go away and look at what's required, really, I guess, the resources to produce it. Obviously, we've got potentially Helen Norfolk Wildlife Trust as well, potentially, say that. So yes, Chair, if we could go away and we can look at what's required, then obviously it would be key to public open space team would have to be, you know, the main players, because obviously if we do adopt one, we've got to be able to deliver on it, haven't we? But yeah, that will be something that will be included in that final cabinet report in the summer.
Thank you. Then I shall ask for us to note the report. Duly noted. Thank you. Now, agenda item 9 has been withdrawn as the speaker is unable to attend today. Did anybody want to speak briefly on opportunities for biodiversity? If not, I shall throw it open to any other. Thank you.
I could just give a little one in terms of biodiversity net gain. So everyone is probably aware that there's on-site net gain and there's off-site net gain. The off-site net gain creates a new market for people to come in with land specifically to create habitats for nature. Where there's no local market, providers might be forced to go to the statutory credits, which is national market. Net gain could be anywhere, so we don't want that. So what we're working on in planning is to bring forward habitat banks which are local. The expectation is that perhaps small sites aren't going to be able to deliver on site, and there's also a part in the legislation that says only significant net gain on site needs to be secured. So even where small sites are able to provide net gain, it may not be significant, so we may not be able to secure that for the 30 years, whereas perhaps if they were to go to a habitat bank provider, that is secured for 30 years. So, you know, ideally we would secure every single piece of net gain and that would be great, but it's not practical in the planning system, given how many applications there are. And as I say, it might actually be better to push that net gain to a landscape level projects where the habitats are exactly where we want them, they're contributing to the landscape networks of habitats, etc. So that's what we're looking at in planning. We've got at least six providers that are coming forward and want legal agreements, all local, Gayton, Downham, Heacham, Lake and Heath, etc. Quite a diverse variety of habitats as well. So everything from grasslands to floodplains, hedgerows, ponds, etc., which is what we want, because in the metric you do need to do like for like or like for better. So that's what we're doing in planning, to try and to look for opportunities for biodiversity. We're also, we're involved in the steering groups for local nature recovery strategy, etc., which is a chance for us to input and get our sites on that map. So once it's on the local nature recovery strategy network, that's what informs where the net gain goes. So by inputting into that, we can make sure that our local sites are on that net gain is steered towards providing habitats that buffer those habitats that are important in Kings Lynn, etc. And I do know from the Wildlife Trust, I know that the Wildlife Trust have got a few of these habitat banks on the register. Until a few weeks ago, there was nobody on the net gain register at all. But the Wildlife Trust have brought 2 or 3 forward, one in Oxfordshire. Can't remember where the other one is, but so I'm optimistically hoping that our Wildlife Trust might bring some sites forward, which again will enrich our local market, which is of course what we want. Yeah, we don't want any we don't really want, sure everyone's on board, we don't really want any net gain going out of the borders of our county. We want it provided where it's offset. So the more habitat bank providers that we have, the better position we're in to do that. And the easier it is for developers. Again, if they're not having a hard time with net gain, they're going to be more on board with supplying it, rather than if they get a hard time every time they come in with an application. So
Understood.
that's what we're doing.
Thank you. Are there any questions on that? Yes, Councillor Parish.
I have voiced my concerns or dubious thoughts on biodiversity net gain in the past. I imagine the one at Eacham is Wild Ken Hill, and Wild Ken Hill is a commercial operation, which is biodiversity by default, and you pay to see the biodiversity. So if somebody has a housing estate built somewhere and they lose their bit of grassland or woodland, and they're told that it's okay, there'll be biodiversity net gain a few miles up the road, which you have to pay and go and see. I don't think that's reasonable, quite honestly. I mean, in my simple mind, I always thought that biodiversity net gain meant you improved the area in which development occurred, so that insects, birds, wildflowers could proliferate better, trees could grow, the environment looks better. Not a few miles down the road, there's a reserve run by Wildlife Trust, or up the road, there's a commercial concern where you pay to go and see trees. Is quite the way forward. But I do understand the implications and the difficulties that planning officers have with all this, because there are countless applications, and maybe 2 or 3 houses, 9 houses, it may be difficult to establish biodiversity net gain. But for anything bigger, I think it should be local rather than elsewhere. I mean, it's a money generating thing at the moment, isn't it? People are selling opportunities to buy bits of their field for biodiversity net gain, basically.
Yes, Claire.
I mean, I would say I don't disagree with you, Terry. I'm an ecologist. I don't want that habitat even to be touched. I would rather, if someone's coming in and they've got a woodland on site, I would wish that planning application was refused. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. These big developments, again, where they're bringing in biodiversity on site, and a large proportion of that is people's gardens. You already heard these guys talk about how it riles them up for people to rip that out. So again, if the habitat is provided in someone's garden for a small application, and in 5 years they can rip that out, the net gain might as well not have even existed. We might as well not have even pushed for it, because they've ripped it out. They've ripped out the hedge, they've ripped out the grassland, they've paved over it. I will say, at least with habitat banks, we can enforce that on a large scale. We can enforce that as it is. They have to send in reports every year. They've got specialists on board, etc. Which small scale net gain, where again, once it falls into the hands of a household, that they can do what they like. We have no control over it, really. But yeah, I don't disagree with you. But the legislation just hasn't been brought in that would allow us to do what would be 100% best.
I said what I said was, I raised my concerns about it. You know, I'm just dubious about it. That's all.
Thank you. Anyone else? I'll put my pennyworth in. We'll give people a couple of seconds. It's made more onerous if you're doing your biodiversity units further afield. Would Claire like to just explain that briefly, that there is some form of encouragement to keep it as local as possible?
Yeah, so within the metric, it's a big calculator basically on a spreadsheet. There's a section in there for strategic significance and spatial risk. And this looks at where the habitat is being provided. So to simplify it, the further away you are, the more penalised you are, the more net gain you'll have to provide. If you're providing net gain in the same site, you won't be penalised at all. You'll be providing unit for unit. If you're providing it by statutory credits, which again could be, let's say it's in Suffolk, you're penalised by 1.5. So you could be paying for twice as many credits as you're actually destroying, because you're penalised so heavily for going away from local. So that's what's been put in place in the metric to try to rectify this concern. So that's what we're working with really. So that is why we're trying to do the local markets. But you're right, local market could still be, you're in Gayton and you're offsetting in Heacham. Yeah, but unfortunately the legislation is what it is. It didn't come in quite as strong as I would have liked, and a lot of ecologists would have liked, but they've put in a few things that we can, you know, hook the developers on. But that's it, really. Sorry. I will say the Heacham one isn't Ken Hill. It does abut Ken Hill, but it's not part of Wild Ken Hill. It's separate from Wild Ken Hill. It's run by the Environment Bank. But yeah, you are right. There's nothing to. I mean, it is people that are coming into the market are going to make a lot of money on it because there's not a lot of sites and people are desperate to grab the credits. So, unfortunately, that's what it is with all markets, though. But
what's the minimum size you can register for area of land you can register for?
There is no minimum size at all. It's not specified. Most of the sites we've got coming in are quite large areas of land, particularly the one up by Downham and Lakenheath that's coming forward with the RSPB. The only thing to be wary of for us is that some of those sites are already under obligation for other funding. So I know part of the RSPB land has already got funding for under peatland projects or carbon offsetting projects. So you know, that's just something that we need to be wary of when we're looking at habitat bank providers. But some of them are purely for net gain. But as you say, because it's a market now, there's several different nature-based solutions that people can dip into: carbon credits, nutrient neutrality, BNG. So that's exactly what people do, and they're looking at what can they do with their land to make the most money, and that's where we're at.
Thank you. So it becomes speculative between which way to go, whether you want your carbon offsets or your BNG.
Yeah.
Or both.
Thank you. Any other questions, or shall we move on?
Very, very briefly, there was a suggestion, not by me, but from others, that the council goes into the market.
There has. Is it? Does anybody want to suggest whether what the situation is, exploring that possibility?
I mean, we're just concentrating on delivering what we have to deliver legally, which is going to be difficult enough, if I'm honest, at the moment. It's anything but simple. Fortunately, we're actually in a better position than a lot of authorities for BNG because we've got a number of sites coming forward. We have legal agreements that are being looked at. Effectively, what we're looking at is implementing the legal system, really. Obviously, all sites became liable, the small sites, from 1st of April, was it 2nd of April, something like that. So, you know, it's almost time ticking on. Those applications will start to come to a decision, and we need to be getting prepared to be able to deal with it from a BNG point of view. And that's what to be honest, that's what we're concentrating on at the moment. Yes, I suppose in theory, that could be something that can be looked at. I'm looking at public open space, but potentially, but I think as a planning authority, we are just, it's going to be hard enough just to get our heads around the planning implications of BNG. I think there's going to be lots of practice that will evolve over the years. And, you know, I think a lot of authorities are learning as they go along. There's been a couple of pilot authorities, but other than that, I think everyone's in that same difficult boat, really.
The new village green could apply as well. The new village green could put in as an area.
It can be explored. Does Matthew want to come in on that, or I apologise?
No, you're welcome, Chair. Yeah, I mean, obviously the Borough Council does have various parcels of land dotted around the whole of the borough. And, you know, we can explore the opportunity around, you know, going into the market. And oddly enough, I've just been approached by a firm of solicitors where the Borough Council potentially is going to be gifted a parcel of land. So we're looking at the moment, and again, it's sort of, I have no idea what condition it is and what sort of level of biodiversity it's got. But I understand it may be common land and therefore limited uses it could be put to. So potentially, you know, the Bug Hotel, the piles of rocks, all that list, you know, in theory, you could do something like that on that side. But I have to confess, I don't know enough about this stuff, and it's quite a steep learning curve, but we'll have a look at it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Anyone else, or shall we move on? I think it's a case of noting the report. Thank you very much. We're running out of time. Can you briefly put forward any other business, Councillor Coons?
Yeah, just very briefly, it really follows on from what you were saying. A farmer in the village right close to me now has just put in a good half mile of hedgerow, probably nearer 3/4, in the last 2 or 3 months. I just wondered, would that be recorded anywhere? Does anybody need to know about it?
Not as far as net gain's concerned.
No.
I mean, I mean, the thing is, that something like that could bring something like that forward for an offsetting site, but it almost wouldn't be worth it for the legal agreements for the amount that they would get, particularly the further we go into this, the more providers there are going to be available.
I just wondered whether, you know, we're always saying we're losing hedgerows and we're losing this, well, we've just gained half a mile in one chunk. If it's not recorded, nobody did know about it, are they? Just wondered this.
Councillor de Beaupelle.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to reply to that. It might be worth contacting Norfolk County Council, actually, because they have a Million Trees initiative and they're desperate. They're very, very short of that target currently. Might be worth letting them know, and I'm sure they'll gladly add all the numbers of trees in the hedgerow to their, you know, to their tally.
Okay, thank you very much. We will, I think it's a case of perhaps we should look into that and come back. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance today. It's been a really interesting and valuable discussion. The date of the next meeting is the 14th of May 2024 at 4 p.m. And then after that, it's the 25th of June 2024 at 4 p.m. So it just leaves me to thank everybody for your time.